Yeah, but anyway, so that's what the holdup is, and she's almost there.
Oh, goodness. All right.
I'm gonna mute myself again so I don't get in trouble.
Yeah.
I'll meet you in person sometime.
Yeah, that would be great.
It would. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello, everyone. I think we're ready to get started. Thank you all so much for coming this evening especially on this very, very snowy winter night. So thanks for making commitment to this very critical topic in the community of short-term rentals. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Ann Schneider. I'm the Director of Community Planning and Development. And so we're gonna go ahead and, let me get my clicker. So Cece doesn't have to read my mind. And let's go ahead and get started. Maybe. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, you're just gonna do it for me? Okay. So tonight, this is a policy recommendation review brought to you by Community Planning and Development in collaboration with Economic and Planning Systems, or EPS. And so the overview tonight is that we're going to do a map review. We're going to provide you definition of a community housing overlay. And we're going to look at where currently their short-term use in Lake County currently. Then we're going to go into EPS's presentation on their findings and policy recommendation. They're going to really go into depth, more than I'm going to do right now, just kind of give you kind of an overview. And then we're going to go into a CAP discussion. And then we're going to highlight some important dates, like what's coming up next, what's this process, and how will we eventually get to some decision making. And then we're going to open it up because we want to hear from everyone that was able to join us tonight. As well as
I don't even think that they'd let you even chime in.
I wouldn't think so. Folks joining us on through Zoom. So we've got a really good audience this evening. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the guiding principle behind this work for CPD and EPS. And that's really been the preservation of community housing, environmental stewardship, and then recognizing that there is a place for short-term rentals within our community. There's both a need that purpose-built lodging can't address in our peak season. And so, we really wanted to look at this as a balanced approach. So, Cece, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So we've created this community housing overlay. And the variables that we use, we really wanted to look at areas of Lake County that the housing cost is more
This just all about
moderate
this issue.
Price range. And then accessibility is really important. Food access, schools, medical care, parks, transit. And so you will see that we have in these shaded areas of the community, largely this is the West Park area, parts of Cooper and Capitol subdivision. This is like the Toledo Avenue, or locals refer to it as Chicken Hill area. And then this area to the east that's just adjacent to the city of Leadville. And then of course our manufactured home communities. So Mountain Valley Estates and Mountain View Villages, east and west, and then Lake Fork. And you'll see that these all have transit connections that arrive at this accessibility. So that's really been the focus on an area, one of those guiding principles, preservation of community housing. So this has created an overlay area that we really wanted to concentrate on. What is the degree of short-term rental use in these areas? So the next map demonstrates that. So currently we have 19 licenses in that area. The areas that aren't shown don't have short-term rentals. So this is just an identification of the amount of licenses within that area that we would define as being a community housing overlay. the next slide, sorry, you don't have to click. We wanted to kind of show where short-term rentals are naturally occurring currently. And so in the central area of Lake County, so this is the area outside of that shaded area. These are neighborhoods such as Jim Valley, Four Seasons, Matchless, Silver Hills, Turquoise Lake Estates, Mountain Pines, and then we go out towards Turquoise Lake, Grand West, up to Sylvan Lakes, Cooper Meadow, and then down as far as Down and Track. And in this area, we have 39 licenses currently. Next slide will show us the north portion of the county, and this is Highway 91 area. And so along that corridor, we currently have 12 licenses. Next, the highest concentration of short-term rentals is really the southern part of the county, where we have 57 licenses. And this largely incorporates the Ross subdivision, Panarch, the Village of Twin Lakes, and Gordon Acres. So then we thought it'd be really good to show you on a map kind of the concentration in the southern part of the county. So the next slide shows Panarch and Ross. So here's A and C additions of Panarch, 1B of Panarch, and then the Ross subdivision. And important to know that these polygons are parcels. So it's not like a degree of use in this area, like per polygon is one short-term rental. And this will be real important when we look at the Twin Lakes area. So each one of these is a parcel that represents just one short-term rental. So like up here, this isn't like a saturation of short-term rentals, that's just one. And so the next map, I'm supposed to see on this side because of the outside, is the Village and Gordon Acres.
Going really slow.
It's-
Sorry, everyone.
It's okay.
The number of Zoom participants, I think, is overloading my computer.
Oh, I wonder if I can get the clicker.
What's the number of licenses in Panama?
13. Oh, in Panarch. Just in Panarch, so it would be less than 13, so 40, 44. So this is Gordon Acres and the Village of Twin Lakes. And so again, important to realize that this looks like a large saturation area, but it's actually one short-term rental on a parcel, and then this is a parcel. This is actually one short-term rental. So in this area, there's 13 total. Next slide. Okay, so wanted to just kind of bring forth some of the key elements that we asked EPS to take into consideration. This is not an exhaustive list. As Rachel goes into detail, you will see that there's quite a bit. But these are some key points we just wanted to kind of pull out. Primary and standard STR classification. One big takeaway that we had in our last listening session and the comments that we received back is there should be different classifications of short-term rental licenses. So by definition, primary means it's a primary residence, which could be either the owner of the property under our recommendation, or it is a tenant who has permission from the landlord. Perhaps they want to take advantage of the time that we have high occupancy needs during maybe the race events. And if they have permission from their landlord, we have a copy of their list and permission, then they would qualify under the definition as a primary. Standard STRs are anything that's not being used as a primary residence. We wanted to really highlight that the sustainability and preservation of local housing is a priority. And we've identified that early in the scope of work. Both a review of the environmental impacts, so well inspected, or the impact to wells from septic, or the impact on over maximizing a septic. So those were definitely areas that we wanted to make sure were included. We wanted them to look at community character and lifestyle. We wanted to identify that tourism and lodging is important and visitation is important in Lake County. And again, that there are times that purpose-built lodging can't accommodate the need for the visitation and in peak times. And then also, what are the best practices? What are the lessons learned from around the state so that we could apply those to our policies and really learn from those times, and also just measure what our policy thoughts and recommendations are, measure those and look at how other communities are dealing with this kind of things. It is my sincere pleasure to be able to introduce Rachel Shinneman. She is, I had the pleasure of working with Rachel in 2018 when EPS did our housing needs assessment. And I have to tell you how much value there is in going into engagement with a firm that knows Lake County, knows Leadville, knows our community. If we immediately can hit the ground running, the areas that we talked about, they can quickly identify and our priorities, and they just understood our community. So it has been a pleasure to work with Rachel, and I'm going to turn it over to her and let her go into the presentation on their findings and policy recommendations.
Great, thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Nice to see everybody on this cold and kind of snowy night that hopefully does not get any more snowy, unless it all stays on the trees and not on the roads. So as Anne said, my name is Rachel. I work with Economic and Planning Systems. We're based in Denver, but do work across the state and nationally, and have a special place in our heart for the mountain communities of Colorado. And this has been a really interesting project for us to work on, because believe it or not, you're all really, really lucky because you're doing this now. A lot of the communities that we've been doing short-term rental work with over the last couple of years are getting to it about 5 years from now, based on where Lake County is at. And right now we can be forward-looking instead of trying to very quickly roll everything back. So it may or may not feel like it, but we're in a really good position. And we're in a place where we can set things up for a sustainable future. And that's really the goal here. And so let's just stay up. Yeah. No worries. So as we were looking at what key elements of short-term rental policy are most important for Lake County, we really landed on the 5 pieces you see on the screen. So one is the geography or the location of where the units are, and that gets into that community housing overlay that Anne looked at. The second piece is the licensing. And so again, that primary resident versus standard license, and then also how to structure the licenses, what requirements to have within that. A key piece was environment, health, and safety. This is a rural community. A lot of these homes are on wells and septic systems. And so making sure that there's a recognition of that within the policy. And we're putting parameters in place to mitigate any potential negative impacts of visitation, both in terms of numbers and in terms of people coming to the community who don't even know what a septic system is, let alone what to do or not to do with one. And that gets into this education piece. And so how do we layer some education into this in order to be providing the right level of information to people, and then enforcement. So how do we make sure that the parameters that we're putting in place are being followed? And the key assumptions, as Anne mentioned earlier, is tourism is a key economic sector here. We're not looking to minimize that. And we're also recognizing that short-term rentals are a core part of the lodging inventory, but at the same time, there are impacts of the use. And so we're looking to enable that use, enable that positive economic impact while mitigating any potential negative impacts. So I'm going to walk through the 5 categories, and then we'll have discussion components at the end. This is, again, all sort of draft recommendations right now. Nothing is set in stone yet. That said, we're on a pretty rapid timeline towards the end of the moratorium. So we're moving quickly, but input is pretty critical at this point. So the geography or location component, and for all of these, we have sort of the policy objectives on the left, which are the underlying reason for pursuing a policy, and then the potential policy on the right of the slide. So for geography location, we want to focus this use in the areas that are most suited to visitation. And really preserve areas that are more suited to resident community housing for that purpose. And so we want to maintain our local neighborhoods and not get into the situation that other communities are in, where all of a sudden people are living on blocks where 80% of homes are dark a lot of the time. Prices have gone up and it's no longer a local neighborhood. From the last housing assessment, the next housing assessment is, I'm sure gonna find the same thing. There are significant local housing needs, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to preserve the housing opportunities that currently exist in addition to creating new ones. So we're looking to differentiate how short-term rentals work in those community housing areas versus in the rest of the county. And we'll see how that flows out through the rest of this. So I think we have 3 slides on licensing. There's a lot of different components in here. Some of this is just enhancing what's already being done. Some of this is adding additional components. But a couple of these key policy objectives. So 1, we want to continue tracking and understanding how many units there are in the community, potentially add some data tracking to understand what's the nature of these units. Are they big? Are they small? Are they on septics? Are they not? And what's the utilization? The key component here is differentiating between primary residence and not, and then between community housing areas and not. There are a couple other components. A major factor is also trying to reduce speculative investment. And so we'll see how that works. It's the last bullet point on the slide. Spoiler alert. But I'll get there in a second. So the first piece is these license categories. So there will be 2 types of short-term rental licenses. One is for primary residence. So if you can prove that the unit that you want a license for is your primary residence, whether that's through, like a voting registration, driver's license, some other forms of identification, there's different sort of best practices on how to prove that. That's one thing. You get one of those licenses, right? It's for your primary residence. And then there's the standard license, and that's every other property. And so we're looking at potentially implementing license caps, and we'll get to that and we'll have a discussion about that. But the idea is that primary resident licenses would be cap exempt. And so whatever the license got, like every single person who lives in Lake County, if you own, obviously you can do whatever you want. And if you rent, as Ann said, if there's an agreement with the landlord, every single resident of Lake County could get a short-term rental license because there's a natural limit on how much that home is being used. It's your primary residence. So, if race weekends, you want to get out of town and, pay your mortgage for a while, whatever it is, those high visitation times, every single resident has access to that opportunity. Everyone who lives here feels the impacts of all the market pressure of all the visitation. We want to ensure that those people can also benefit from it. Standard licenses would be capped.
I know one that's got a
That's everything
shovel.
else. And we want to make sure that we're not oversaturating, and also that we're maintaining some of the nature of the housing. And that's where we get into the community housing versus other areas as well. And there's a couple of different ways to manage the licenses in general. Let's just go back up to this first one. Other way. We're just previewing everything.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. So a couple other things. One is that we would be limited to 1 license per parcel. So let's say there's a parcel that has a primary home and an ADU, for example. They could not both be short-term rentals. 1 short-term rental per parcel, and then 2 short-term rentals per property owner or entity. So especially with a cap, you can't have one person come in and take 10 of the licenses. We want to ensure that there's access to as many people as possible. So 1 per parcel, 2 per person or entity. So let's say I live here, but let's say, I want a license for my home. That's 1 that's cap exempt. I could also get 1 more. That other one would be subject to the cap because it would not be for my primary residence. but I could have two if I have two properties. And then the key piece of this is that the licenses would not be transferable. So if I sell a property, if there's a transfer of title, the license does not transfer with that. It goes back into the pool. It's available again. The person who purchases that property could apply for that license. But what that does is that reduces a lot of the speculative buying because there's no guarantee that when that person purchases the home, they get the short-term rental license. And so that's a key piece that's becoming a best practice, especially in Colorado communities, is to not allow that transfer of license at sale. So the next component of the licensing is the cap. And so this slide, you'll see that highlighted part is because we're going to be having a discussion about where that cap might be set. But we're looking to cap the standard licenses. So again, primary resident licenses, there's no cap. Every person can get one. For the standard licenses, we would cap those. And so there's a couple of different options. One is where they currently are, which is 127. There would be a couple available because anyone who's currently a primary resident, their license would be out of that cap and those would be available. Another option is potentially to go up to 170, which is a slight increase, would match Leadville, and would be in the realm of, we'll show a little bit of where other counties and communities are, kind of be within the range of where other communities are. Or there's an option to have no cap, which would not be our recommendation. Like I said at the beginning, we're in a really good place right now. If we all want to revisit this conversation in a couple of years and try to roll things back, that might happen if there's no cap put in place. And then, so right now it says West Park, it would be those community housing areas would be capped at the current levels. And then Dan showed like the only licenses currently are in West Park. But that community housing, those community housing areas would be set at 19 licenses. So that's what's currently there. If any of those properties sell, or if someone does not renew those licenses, then that license would be available for any of those community housing areas, but no more than 19 in those areas. So we're not taking away what's currently there, but not allowing anything else in service of that preservation of those areas for local housing opportunities. And so what happens with a cap is that as some people just won't renew, they'll either forget or they'll be like, this is too much hassle, I don't want to do it anymore. Or as properties sell, then those licenses would go back into the pool. And so there would be a process set up for how to allocate those licenses that become available. There's different ways of doing it. We're still talking about what the best way might be. A lot of communities will do a wait list, and then either the first person on the list gets first access, or they'll do a lottery based on the wait list at time of renewal. So there's different ways to do that. But that's the idea, is that licenses would be capped at whatever level. The primary residence would come out of that. So immediately some would be available, or if the total licenses are increased, there would be some immediately available. And then they would sort of naturally turn over. And this is working differently in different communities right now. Some communities that are trying to roll things back have actually set their caps below what they currently have and are working to get down to the cap through attrition as those properties sell or people don't renew. So those communities aren't going to have licenses available for a very long time. There are other communities like Ouray, they set their cap at 120 licenses. They've only ever gotten to 110, which is where they currently are right now. So there are still 10 licenses available there, but no more than 10. So the actual mechanism of the cap works differently in different communities based on the housing stock and market and all of that. But having a set limit is becoming best practice. And then the last piece of the licensing is, so these are pieces that already exist, but just enhancing them a little bit. So the local contact requirement right now, license holders need to designate someone who's available 24 hours. We would recommend adding in that they also have to be within a certain distance of the property. So some communities will do it based on time, some will do it based on distance. Obviously, anyone who's been around these parts long enough knows that time is a funny thing when you're trying to get somewhere, as evidenced by when I got here today. So distance can be, a little bit of a better mechanism, but ensuring that it's not just somebody who's available by phone, but someone who can actually be at the property if needed. And then just maintaining that annual renewal requirement. And then potentially for the standard licenses, requiring that they're actually used. So when there's a cap, we want to make sure that those licenses, those units are actually being used as short-term rentals, right? We've recognized that they are an important part of the lodging economy. We want to make sure that people aren't just getting a license to have it. And so potentially having someone show that they rented that unit for at least 14 nights in the previous year in order to renew. And so that can be set at different levels, based on, sort of reasonable occupancy. 14 nights is not out of the realm of reasonable. But that's something, you know, that's a policy decision based on what would be reasonable. But showing that the unit is actually being used, because otherwise we want to give that license to someone else who's going to use it for its intended purpose. So the next part is the environmental health and safety. And I will say, I knew about septic systems before. I thought I knew a decent amount. I learned so much during this process. So a key concern going into this was overuse of septics by guests, by these properties, and ensuring that we are maintaining environmental quality and water quality for those properties and surrounding properties. And so we're recommending two major components of policy to address this. And so one is pretty strict occupancy restrictions, and the other is inspection requirements. So for occupancy, the occupancy will be based on the septic capacity. That is it. There's no flexibility there. The septic system is designed for a certain number of people, and that is the capacity of the unit. Then we get into enforcement of how we make sure that it's not being rented to more than those people. But that is a very strict policy, and any violation of that would be taken very seriously. And so for any unit that currently has a design report, that gives the occupancy, that's it. If it's an older system and it doesn't have that, then it would be based on the fire safety inspection and the number of bedrooms. And if someone wants to challenge that and say that their unit actually has a higher occupancy, they would have to independently get an engineering report to prove that. And then, so that's the one piece, is making sure that those units are not rented to more people than the system can handle. The second piece is making sure that the system itself is in good shape. And so requiring an initial inspection from all properties that have STR licenses and are on septic systems. And this is similar to the transfer of title inspection requirement. So the parameters already exist. The inspectors sort of know what they're looking for, all of those things. So giving, what do we say, 2 years for anyone to get that inspection, given that they're two inspectors locally and we need to account for their potential workload. So anyone would have up to 2 years to show an initial inspection that's from within the last 5 years. So if someone had their system inspected 3 years ago, that's awesome. And then starting after that, every 3 years, the system has to be re-inspected to make sure that it's in good working condition. Anything that's identified similar to the transfer of title requirements would be addressed. And there's sort of the two categories. If it's, and I'm not going to try and use the categories because I'm not going to get them right, but if it's something that can be easily fixed, they can keep their license and then they just have to fix it. If it's something major, then the license is suspended until it's fixed. Just to make sure that these units that are having people come in all the time, we're not leaking things into the ground that shouldn't be. And this is really beneficial for the property owner as well. Because if anyone has tried to repair or replace the septic system, it's not cheap. And so, and it's not fast. And in a high mountain community where construction season is pretty short, you might lose the use of that property for a year. And so we want to take proactive measures to make sure that, one, we're not having negative environmental issues. We're not negatively impacting neighbors, especially when we're talking about water supply. And then we're also just, again, maintaining that economic use of the property. And then the other thing is, broader occupancy limits. And so this is, more of a safety thing, but for properties that are not on septic systems, based on the legal bedroom count, from the safety inspection. So right now the recommendation would be 2 people per bedroom plus 1, could be plus 2. It really varies by community. And the plus 1 or 2 is to account for like a pull-out couch or something like that. And so that's again for properties not on septic systems. So on a septic system, then it's just the design report, that is the occupancy. And then just no outdoor fires in short-term rentals, just avoid those concerns and issues. So then the last 2 pieces, are less unit specific. So one is education. And so this is just providing information both about the regulations and more broadly. And so 2 pieces, one for property owners or license holders, and one for guests. And so for property owners, sort of a guide to the regulations, why we need them, why having a healthy septic system is a good thing and why maintaining it is good, and why not having 20 people in a unit that can support 5 is actually a really good idea, even if you can rent it for more money. If you put 20 people in there, you probably can't cover the new septic system. And then sort of tips and tricks also for how to maintain it. So things like doing the sheets and towels between bookings, that laundry, doing it off-site. So you're not putting 3 loads of laundry into your septic system between every booking. Potentially putting a buffer period between bookings to let the system clear out. Things like that, that might not be as obvious, but are probably a really good best practice. And just helping people understand that. So it's not a mandate, it's not a regulation, but it's just providing the information to people and they can make the decision that they want. And then for guests, one is, there's sort of a good neighbor guide in progress. So that can go into every unit to help people understand trash and wildlife and why they can't have a fire outside and where to drive their ATVs and where not. And, you know, how to manage narrow dirt roads, things like that. And then also do's and don'ts for septic systems. So like maybe don't pour your grease down the drain. That's bad news bears. And then all of the other things that come with being a visitor in a high alpine community. And then the last piece is the enforcement. And so really maintaining the current mechanisms that are in the code in terms of hearings for violations and all of that. Doing specific enforcement on occupancy, so ensuring that the listings are representing the actual occupancy maximums associated with the license. And then also doing the fire safety check at time of license and then every 3 years. So both inspections, the fire safety inspection and the septic inspection would be on a 3-year cycle. They don't have to be at the same, you know, in the same year. But ensuring that there are smoke detectors, CO2 detectors, proper egress, confirming bedroom counts, all of that. And then that's for right now. Future considerations, again, improving the data collection through the licensing. So just, you know, the more we know, the more we know. And as data people, we're always in favor of collecting more data, but really getting a better understanding of where and how these units are being used. Updating the licensing fee that's in process to actually cover the costs to the county of administering the program. Potentially undertaking a nexus study. Some communities are adopting regulatory fees on short-term rentals to address local workforce impacts. So the more visitors we have to the community, the more restaurants and coffee shops and, you know, auto repair things for people whose cars break down here, all of those things. We need more people to work there to support that visitation. Those people need somewhere to live. And so we can make a connection between the visitation and the spending of those guests and local workforce needs and get more money into local housing programs. So that's a potential next step. And then right now, all the licensing and management is done internally, potentially looking at external systems for that, if the need arises, but not right now. And that's, I think, what we've got. Yeah.
And we can take a couple last slides here before we go into public comment. And so Rachel went over this, and we just broke it down a little bit. So tonight, what we'd really like to do is gain, your feedback on option A, B, or C. A is a cap right where we are, that's very predictable. We, know, and the only way that, new units become available is if, somebody doesn't renew, or properties are sold, or some of our current licenses would fall into that primary, license category. So, that is, option A is a pretty, pretty predictable scenario, and it counts currently for about 4.7% of the house in Lake County. Option B would be a cap with the ability for some growth. At 170, that's just roughly 33% growth. Opportunity for more properties to come online, and of course, that would be the standard licenses. There'd be no cap again on primary, because that hits that goal and checks that box of sustainability for local housing. And there'd be no new standard permits in the community housing overlay. 19 is capped, that's where we're at for standard licenses. That increase would account for about 6.3% of the of the total housing units in Lake County. And currently in the city of Leadville, there's 171 licensed SDRs for comparison. And then option C is that no cap. I would also say option B, one consideration for option B is that with these new regulations, policy recommendations that Rachel just went through, we directed short-term rentals in areas of the county that are more appropriate, that aren't typically areas that the housing stock is supportive of attainable workforce housing. And we've put environmental safeguards in place. So we put regulations in place that would be, option B assumes that. Option C assumes that those regulations are enough and that we don't need to consider controlled growth in standard STRs. Option C, I don't think EPS or CPD would probably be a big supporter of that option, but it's certainly an option that's available. And so that is that there would be no limit on standard or primary. And the only place that we would have any cap would just be in those community housing overlay areas. And so those are the three options that we'd love to have some feedback on this evening. Our next slide. So it's always kind of good to just kind of look around and say, hey, where do those percentages kind of compare throughout the state? And so you'll see EPS did a great job of just kind of going and giving us a comparison around the state. And you'll see that, we're pretty much right in line. We're not really disproportionate to what we see in other communities, and even at either percentage. We're still, at our existing percentage, we're kind of modest. At increasing to 6.3, yeah, we may be, we're not disproportionate to the other communities. Next slide. So I think one of the things that we really want to make sure that everyone is aware that currently has a license is that there is time to get into compliance under the new regulations. So Rachel, kind of spoke on that. To get the fire safety checklist or the fire safety check done, you'd have roughly 10 months to get that. You can be aware that it's needed. And so by the time you renew, if you're a current license holder, you'd have time. On the septic inspections, if you've had a septic inspection within the last 5 years, we'll accept that at the time of renewal, or you have time to get your system inspected. So just wanted to kind of highlight for anyone that's currently licensed, there is time under these new, whatever the outcome would be, in our recommendations, we've built in time for to come into compliance. And then our next, so what's the process? Where are we at? So tonight we wanted to first come to the public with these policy recommendations. On the 16th of February, we're going to be taking them to the Planning Commission, who is the recommending body for the Board of County Commissioners, and the Board of County Commissioners, the final decision makers. we'll host a work session to go through these same recommendations in detail and get feedback. And from there, we will start designing a code amendment. We'll actually start drafting the regulations themselves. So that happens on the 16th. Then we'll go into a code amendment application after that. And the public hearing will be February 26th. There's an opportunity on February 26th for public comment. This is a legislative decision-making process, and we'll definitely open it up again at that point. And the public can speak to the regulations that are before the Board of County Commissioners for consideration. And then on February 28th, this coincides with the expiration of the moratorium. We'll be taking those final regulations to the board for final action. After that, when they're approved, then we'll go into implementation. So those are just some important dates and opportunities to continue through this process. Next slide. So we're gonna go into questions and feedback, both online and everyone that's here. We just ask that everybody be respectful. There's a lot of different viewpoints on this topic, and we've identified that early on. So we're just gonna all assume good intent and just be respectful of each other's, even if there are opposing viewpoints. We ask that if somebody has already made the point that you would like to make, that when you get up, you just say, hey, I really agree with Bill and I support that statement. So we can we've got a lot of people, we've got probably close to 60 people on Zoom and everybody's here. So we just want to be considerate of everybody's time. So if you have a new comment, please share that with us or provide support for something that's already been said. And then we might, depending on time, we might have to start not allowing comments to go beyond like 3 minutes, just because we want to give everyone a chance to speak that would like to. So if you are on Zoom, what we thought we would attempt to do, is that so what you'd like to do, Cece? What we'd like to do if you are on Zoom is to put your question in the chat. That way, in the natural flow of how things happen, Cece can make sure and interject your question into the mix so that we can try to get to as many questions or comments tonight from everyone. If you miss an opportunity or you feel like you didn't have enough time to state your opinion or share your thoughts, reach out to staff. There's a couple different ways. We have an online form that you can, with endless characters, you can tell us everything that you would like to tell us. We'll pass that on to the decision makers, or you can reach out to staff and set a time to come by the office and talk to anyone on the staff. I also wanted to mention that if your question, you can certainly give Rachel questions. I'm here for my department. Bryce Ehrlich is here. He is our mapping director and deputy director. So if you have any questions for him, and David Wilson is here. He is our environmental health specialist, septic related questions. He can totally answer those. Cece Williams, she administers the short-term rental process. So if you have renewed a license, you probably have talked to Cece, or if you've had questions about the process, you probably talked to Cece. So we are all here, and any of us that you might have a question for, please feel free. Commissioner Fiedler is in the room, and I think right here. And then I don't know if, do we have Commissioner Marcella and Mudge online? Okay. So Commissioner Fiedler will take all commissioners.
And one other thing I'll just add is that this is not the first point of feedback in this process. And so crafting the policies started based off of all the feedback to date. So anyone who has provided feedback up till this point, I have personally read it. So thank you for that. There were over 60 pages of written comments, and every single one of them was read. And we also did direct outreach to specific stakeholders as well. And so this is just building off of all of that, and hopefully a lot of the feedback that you've already provided is reflected in these.
That's a great point. Yeah.
I'll suggest that we do maybe one question in the room and then one online. Go back.
That sounds great. All right. Jan.
Thanks. That was a pretty thorough presentation. Thank you very much. I don't know whether I can ask 3 quick questions. Have you thought about, and you probably have, why not differentiate the number of nights that somebody rents out? If you only rent out for 10 nights versus 110 nights, that seems like a different license possibly. The second one, shouldn't violators pay for the enforcement? That seems better than charging everybody. Have you looked at that? And the third one is, I live downtown Twin Lakes. Wouldn't that make sense, since it is a business district, to maybe have that maybe a slightly different rule than the surrounding pen? So those would be my questions. Thank you.
So great questions. The number of nights, it's one option, based on sort of the local dynamics. We didn't think it was maybe necessary here. The primary resident license kind of does that, because that's limited in how many nights it can be rented out, because it's your own place. So that sort of naturally is a differentiator. And then otherwise, it's just sort of a license is a license. There's just a limited season in Lake County for when these units can be rented. So there's less differentiation than in a place, like Denver, where 365 nights of the year, you could rent the property and there would probably be someone to rent it. So yes, it's an option. It's just, we didn't think it was necessarily the best choice for this community. On the enforcement piece, so the licensing fee, just addresses the ongoing cost to administer the system. The enforcement is a piece of that. That could be, fines or anything associated with violations, is a consideration, and that's something that could potentially be added into the policy. But the basic license fee is to cover the ongoing costs of the program. And the third one.
Whether it's worth splitting out downtown. Twin
Right.
Lakes.
Yeah, so again, different communities will get to different levels of specificity, based on sort of the guiding principles of this effort. We felt that sort of the separating out the community housing areas got at, the goals of this. But Breckenridge looked at like the base of the resort, the part that's in the town, and like that's a distinct area. And so it's very dependent on the community. It's not to say it's not something that could be pursued. We haven't looked at it at this point. With a lot of these options, there isn't necessarily a right or a wrong answer. There's different ways to do things. And so there are some potentially right and wrong things, but for the most part, there's just different ways to do things. There are lots of ways to structure these types of policies. And we're building best practices as we go. So things that I noted in the presentation have started to be established over the last couple of years. But this is new territory in a lot of ways. And so we're learning from other communities where we can. We're learning from local contexts where it's important. And we're trying to come up with the best solution for right now. That's not to say that this can't be adapted and improved down the road. But all great questions.
Oh, are we gonna, I'm so sorry, I think we're gonna take one online. So Alberta asked with the change in workplace, remote working, what is homeowner, what if a homeowner lives out of state but can also work remotely part of the year from Leadville? How are we going to define primary residence?
So I would define that as, where you spend the majority of your time. So if you, if you would have to, for tax purposes, for a lot of different reasons, you're gonna have to identify what your primary residence is. And it would be defined as your primary. So it's really up to the property owner for them to choose in what way in which they want to manage that and determine what's their primary. Oh, okay. Gabby?
Just to follow up on that quickly before my comment, is the city makes people sign an affidavit that says they live at that residence for, I can't remember the exact, maybe it's 180 days, so half the year, to say like, to certify. I don't know if the county's interested in doing something like that, but that's what the city does. So for my comment, I'm really happy to see that it's very similar to the city regulations. I think having that consistency is really important because the borders are blurry sometimes and people don't really know whether they're in the city or the county. So I think having really similar rules is great. I'm a proponent of option A, of capping things where they are, so that the problem doesn't get worse than it is and kind of managing the number that we have. And my question is, we have a couple new developments potentially on the horizon, so how are you thinking at this, let's say we get a development with 100 new units, like, would you just cross that bridge when you get to it with increasing the number, or what's your thought there so far?
So I really think that, we would do regulations based on what exists today. And then I think that we have to kind of look at those on a case by case basis. So, conceptually, the developments, if they are, have an affordability element in them, I think that, as you know, in the discussion with new neighborhoods as they come on, there will be a lot of room for negotiation, especially if, if they are planning to have an affordability element or if they're going to be a planned unit development. So right now, I would say our regulations are only speaking to where we are at this point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all my question. We have a couple questions regarding ADUs. What's the reasoning behind not allowing short-term rentals, in ADUs?
Go ahead.
So I'll start. That's sort of a point of discussion right now. And so the reasoning behind thinking about ADUs differently is that a lot of the impetus behind the ADU policy was to increase local housing options and to improve availability and affordability for local resident housing. And so if all of a sudden all of those units that were allowed to improve local housing become STRs, then that's counter to the motivation of the policy. That said, if a primary resident lives in their house and short-term rents an ADU on their property, and that income allows them to stay in their house, then that's still fulfilling the goals of helping local resident affordability. So there's a couple different ways to think about it. We haven't fully landed on exactly where the policy recommendation might be, but that's the motivation for thinking about ADUs differently, is because a lot of the impetus of that policy was specifically to improve local resident housing options.
I'm sorry, I don't know your name in the back.
Oh, my name is Yanani.
Okay.
And I was just asking about the same question. I think I work in the area of Breckenridge. I am new here in Lake County. But if I see that you have a little percentage of 6.7 about the housing or that you are going to rent as short term, I think so if you are going to increase too much, you are going to fall in the same in Breckenridge. You don't have people to work. Even the 60% of the people who lives here in the county, we move and we work at places like Bell County, Bell, and also Summit County. And I don't know if you have any relations with those, because in the year that I have living here, I think so the prices for the housing, they increase like a lot. And I saw the rent also is the same. Like you used to find something for $700 for one bedroom, and now it's more than $1,200, $1,500 to $2,000. And I don't know if you are matching the local housing with this project. And I think this is an awesome project to start with short term because it's free. I'm asking, what is the project for the local housing and people who is living here? How it's going to be like, because if you are moving from Summit County to here, then it's because you cannot afford those areas. You are coming here, but if everything is increasing, what's going on?
So I think, so what we are trying to do, and in that community housing overlay, what we're trying to do is find areas where the price of housing is in that low to moderate area. And so whereas that increase would be outside of those communities or areas within the community that we want to really earmark for keeping those attainable locally. So right now, in all of that area that we have 19 licenses, so under every single option, we would never increase the degree of use in that community housing overlay. And those are the areas that, we wanted to make sure were more affordable from a price point, and they were more accessible. they had access to, you know, all of the area amenities as well as transit. So in those areas, I think to me, kind of what you're saying, in those areas, we would never, under any of the options, ever increase the degree of use in that area. Is that,
And do you have anything like on the website or something just to read the areas?
we're introducing them tonight and we will absolutely have these on our website. And if you want to meet with staff and, you know, and provide more input, we would love to meet with you. Thank you.
Next question online is if we decide to apply for a new short-term rental license, when can we submit the application? Is the application the same one prior to the moratorium?
it will not be the same application. The new application will be available as soon as we have adoption of the new regulations. Then we'll go into implementation. The application will be new and it'll be based on, and then you can apply whenever we have units available. So determining on option A, B, or C, that will determine how soon we'll have something available to apply for. And also through this, we'll be determining what that wait list process is. So if you're in a situation where you want to wait list or wait list to go into the lottery. So we will have that by the 28th, when we go into implementation. We'll have all that information on our website, have access to it, so that you'll know next steps. But you can't be prepared with your 2023 or renewal application and be ready with that. The process will look different this time. Andrew?
Real quick, I haven't been in the loophole. My name's Andrew Williams. I'm a full-time homeowner out in Twin Lakes. I'm working 20 years towards working with Union Pacific Railroad. I also worked for Val Resorts for some time too. Union Pacific Railroad as a company offers employee housing. So does Val Resorts, especially Keystone. Now Keystone is turning a new leaf, developing into what I would call a township. My question is, what is Lake County doing on its own for affordable housing, as far as apartments and stuff? Have you considered working with developers or a developer or developers teaming up? And maybe the county giving them a 5, a 10 or 15 or 20-year discount on their taxes or apartments that they build for the shortage. In return, you also negotiate caps on what you rent that out to. I commute back and forth out of this county. I see the convoy of headlights going down towards Copper, going towards Red Cliff. I know we are a service community. We are not comparable to Breckenridge, where we have a ski resort, or Steamboat Springs. Let's face it, it is a service community here. There's a lot of us that work hard and commute for our jobs. The second thing is, I don't want to sound a little sporadic here. I got a lot, but I don't want to take other people's time up. The short-term rentals, we need a website. We need a web link. I personally am on the fence of doing short-term rental back and forth. My taxes go up. I'm a single father. I work 3 jobs. Okay, I got to start thinking outside the box. But over the summer, I had 2 different occasions where people came across my property and I followed them and they went to a short-term rental. I was frustrated. I also think about the person that doesn't support in Lake County or in Leadville, that doesn't support short-term rentals, that are frustrated with them. I need to hear more on that. I don't think I've heard much of anything on that. What about suggesting that we have a public website for short-term rental, and anybody that gets a license goes onto a private website through the county? That way, if you have bad renters at your short-term rental that have disturbed neighbors, you basically 2 strikes and you're out, and you got to renew your permit and you got to prove what you're doing to keep your ship in shape. And then other people that are on short-term rentals can see that you had a conflict with this renter, and that way they can deny this renter if they choose to on a list that's private, to keep people in the communities that are not part of short-term rentals, that are full-time homeowners, to respect them, so there can be a clear path of communication. There's a lot of things I'm looking at outside the box. It's not, we're all talking about the percentages, we're talking about permits and how many we're giving out. Let's talk about the people that don't want nothing to do with it and what can we do to keep them happy as well? Because if you are a short-term rental and you have people that come over and you don't know if they're gonna invite more people than what you're allowed to have, and they have a big party and the sheriff's department gets called. Well, we need to know that person that rented that place and never let them come back into our communities and rent another short-term rental and do this to another person. There's a lot of variables. And one last thing is, I would like to personally see the spreadsheets on all of the rental income in the 81251 zip code to put things back into our community. I have a 6-year-old daughter. We don't even have a playground. I bring her into Leadville or I take her to Buena Vista to play on a playground. We don't even have, and you would think my property taxes as a full-time homeowner would cover that. But let's also think outside the box again. Okay, so if we had short-term rentals, let's offer a family that's renting a house a playground to go to. We need, I mean, there's basic things that still need to be covered that are not, in my mind. And I know everybody has their own perspective, but a website for short-term rental people that are on the permits, I think is a must. So there can be proper communication and warnings, and so we can help one another out. If someone has a problem, there could be a chat box, you know, with suggestions to keep it in-house. And then, I don't know, I got other things I'm gonna email in. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. So that was, I don't know, I'll start if you want, but there was a lot. So the first thing that we're talking about is Lake County, taking some initiative in developing employee, housing. So a little bit different topic than we're talking about tonight in short-term rentals. So I would, encourage you to become familiar with the work of the Housing Coalition and the Regional Housing Authority and different projects that are underway. There's a project to bring 20 units on available. You talked about negotiations with developers on public-private partnerships. So I say yes to everything you said in the first part, but it's not really the discussion that we're having tonight. And I would say, Andrew, there is work being done by both the city and the county on those issues. But it's a little bit of a different topic than we're talking about tonight.
Understood.
On short-term rentals, so I think one of the things that I think that you're saying is that as a property owner, you would love to have maybe the opportunity to consider short-term rental as a way to make your housing more sustainable. Under both option A, B, and C, everything that we're saying tonight is that primary licenses would not have a cap. And so you would have that opportunity under the new regulations. The next thing about sharing information about renters between property owners. I don't think that's completely legal. So I think that's, you know, so in this, and the other thing is I would say we currently do have a website that has lots of information on short-term rentals. We'll have tonight's recording, has all the other town hall meeting recordings. So the county website has a wealth of information, but sharing information between, I'm not an attorney, but sharing information on tenants between license holders, it wouldn't be something the county would be involved in.
Understood.
And was there something else I missed, Rachel? Or was there something
I can
else?
just add quickly, there's definitely a connection in a lot of places between the availability of local affordable housing and short-term rentals. The local affordable housing is a much bigger conversation, as Dan said, but there's a lot of work that's been done and will be done in the future in lots of ways also to get involved in that and have a say in how affordable housing policy is shaped and where priorities are set. So for everyone here, like, please engage in those processes. And we have to make sure that as more people come to the community, there's a community to come to, right? Like, people come to visit a place, it's not a place unless people live here. And so ensuring that there are available affordable opportunities for the community to live here is a key piece of maintaining the tourism economy. So they are intricately linked. The other thing I'll add is that part of the sort of education for renters and guests and like a good neighbor guide, will ideally include things like outside this property is not just all public land. You can't just go wandering anywhere. So things like people wandering across your property, things like that. Right, to helping folks understand that. And so just providing that information, and it's something that's, you know, not just in this community, happens all over. Personal experience with that is like, you know, like people just wandering past me, like, oh, I was just going for a walk, be like, cool. This is private property, you can't just like go for a walk, there's a road, go walk on that. So things like that, just to help people understand, just intentionally providing more information about how to be a good guest in our community, would ideally be an outcome of this.
That's great. We'll take one online and then we'll,
A couple folks online are asking, what the deadline for a septic inspection is for, currently licensed properties.
for currently licensed, so there is, so if you're currently licensed, you're licensed all the way through 2024.
Sorry, for a septic inspection. When will they need to have a septic inspection completed?
So when will they have to have a septic inspection completed for a next renewal?
Right.
So, I have to be here to make sure, but if they've had an inspection within 5 years, we'll accept that. And then from there, we go to a 3-year. But I'm gonna defer to David, he is our public health specialist, and he can elaborate if you'd like.
Yes, so kind of what the idea was, is that if you are a current license holder, you're good for the year 2024. Then when you're applying for renewal in 25, we'd like to see an inspection. So if you have purchased a home within the last 5 years, you probably should have had an inspection done with the transfer title program. So that would count towards that 2025 inspection and renewal. If, let's say, you haven't, you've owned your home for your years and years and years, and you haven't had an inspection done within the last 5 years, we are now informing you, hey, take this year to get that inspection done. So now you're being notified. You have the time and opportunity to spend the next spring and summer and fall to get that inspection done, so that you can be prepared for when you're applying for that 2025 license. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, it makes a lot of sense. I'm sorry, my name is Paul Finley.
Hey.
Thank you. Where do we go to get the inspection, and who does the fire inspection, and do we know how much it's gonna cost?
Great question. For some of it.
Yeah, some of that.
David will be your, he'll be your subject inspection. And I think the fire, Gabby or Kim, do you know how much the fire marshal charges for the fire safety check?
I can't remember.
I think it's under $100.
Is it capped, or is it gonna go up? We do have a lot of costs that go into having it
so-
there. Yeah.
It'll be, costs for administrative fees like this are usually based on cost recovery. So they're not, you know, it's just the time for him to come out and do the inspection. So I think it's $75 for the fire inspection.
That's what's in my head.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, the septic inspection, you know, so it's an every 3-year cost if you haven't had it done recently. So, you know, it is spread over 3 years, but a septic inspection, we could give you a couple of $1,000. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, but that's gonna be a cost that you incur every 3 years. And normally, I would imagine that most property owners are pumping you could have it fall into your normal pumping cycle. Most people pump between 3 and 5 years. So if you have any city use on your system, you should probably be paying, is that accurate?
Yes.
5 years is a normal maintenance.
We didn't like hear it very well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're okay.
So
So
three
how
to-
much was the septic inspection?
So we've heard that, this is not a county inspection, but I think that they charge somewhere between maybe a couple of $1,000.
It includes the pumping and the inspection.
But typically, if you have a septic system, you're gonna be pumping every 3 to 5 years anyway.
Would we call the county to do that, or someone call it Swango or something?
Yes, that's exactly what you do.
Okay.
Go to you go to your company that you typically use, that does your, you know, most all of the companies that do something are also paying attention. Although there is a list that's on the website to public health that will tell you exactly, make sure that your pumper is certified to do inspections.
So you're proposing a couple $1,000 every 3 years?
Normally, if you have a septic system, you're going to probably spend the additional cost for the inspection
I don't know what that runs, maybe it's another additional $500 for the inspection.
Somewhere around that.
So over 3 years.
and an inspection.
Absolutely. So you have to pump and inspector, it's just a cost of the meter service, you're gonna rent your business, if you're gonna rent your home. In Summit County, the short-term rental policy is that you have to, when each time you submit your application for your short-term rental license, you have to provide a pumping and cleaning report. So it's standard, you're gonna wanna have your system pumped if you're short-term renting, you're gonna wanna not over occupy the system. And it's more of a benefit to you than, you know, the county.
Yeah, it's definitely more of a benefit in making sure that your property is safe and, you know, from any kind of threat to a mishap on your septic system. I need this lady back, she's been so patient and waiting.
So when it comes to option A, the 127 cap. I remember in the lodging feasibility study, the third party said that 39% of our lodging accommodations in the county come from short-term rentals. And I'm wondering if we keep that 127 cap, and obviously some people who have a license who would then be taken out of that licensure because they are residents, primary residents. We would obviously already be increasing the percentage that short-term rentals are to our accommodations economy. So I'm wondering if you all have any numbers about how many more accommodations for short-term rentals could come online with that. And if you all have considered or discussed how we actually would already be increasing how many licenses we have or how much accommodation we have in the county, even by using the most conservative option.
The one thing that I will, I'm sure Rachel, you'd like to respond to that. I will say that of our current license number 127, I do not believe that we have very many primary licenses. So I think we're talking about a very minor increase at option A with the licenses that might come online because they are primary. But I think that you've reviewed the feasibility study and you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the takeaway was that there's space for more lodging here. And so where that comes from is, you know, to be seen. But I think either option A or B, like maintaining what's currently here or allowing for an increase. No, if the cap is increased to 170, that's not to say that we'll get 170 licenses. It's saying we can have up to that. And so, you know, if someone says, oh, like I can short-term rent my property, I can make tons of money, and then they end up only renting it 5 nights. And if we have a 14-night minimum requirement for renewal, then they're like, not really working for me. I'm not going to do this anymore. And that's where some of the different pieces can play together. But short-term rentals don't really function the same way as like commercial purpose-built lodging in that like they serve another purpose when they're not being rented. But I think like we've definitely considered how they fit into the broader lodging inventory. And there isn't necessarily a negative impact for either A or B, if that helps answer the question.
I mean, if 127 makes up 39% of our STR of our accommodations, then increasing by like potentially 150 rooms, like 150 beds, that's significant compared to our percentages of what's available commercially. I'm only asking because I do think that we need more accommodations in the summer, and sometimes it can be an argument to increase STRs to try to make up for that accommodations need, whereas commercial accommodations provide actual local jobs. And I just want to make sure that that's part of the conversation in the room, as opposed to using our residential stock, like we get to have a say. And
how we increase our accommodation needs in this community. And I think that people who can pay to have an STR that is not their primary residence, like we're benefiting a very specific part of our population to make up for those accommodations needs, as opposed to providing local jobs.
Yeah, no, that's great feedback, and that's exactly like in considering the different potential ways to cap licenses, like that's exactly the feedback that we're looking for.
Online?
We have a comment online, who's Adam Christopher. If someone lives on their property full time, they should be allowed to utilize it however they see fit. We have 2 ADUs on our property in the village of Twin Lakes, which is not a prime worker housing area. The income we receive from those seasonal rentals is crucial to our livelihood and our ability to remain in Lake County. As a side note, these rentals are only operable during the winter months.
Yeah, can we just take Christopher's information? I'd like to just, about having 2 ADUs that are being used. Not one. Yeah. Right now, our code doesn't allow for that, so that's why I need. Bob, I know you've been waiting for a minute.
Part of my question was, is that 127 cap for primary residence, but those are gonna come out.
Right,
So
right.
that cap is gonna be, I mean, the number is going to be both.
And so of the 127, there are some primary licenses. So we'll stay at 127, but it'll open up some licenses.
Right, okay, that includes me. That, my question is, the primary license issue is one that has to be crystal clear on what that means, because I think that's going to be the biggest abuse, the biggest need of enforcement. I mean, and it's also got to take in mind that this still is kind of a hybrid place. People may only be here 6 months, but it's still there. So I'm just thinking that's got to be really, really clear on what that means, so there's no ambiguity at all.
Agreed. I do like Gabby's example of the affidavit the city signs along with best practices for verification, voter registration, driver's license, whatever, there'll be certain qualifiers, and property owners will have to determine what their primary residents are, and then sign a cert to that and affirm to it. So, but you're absolutely right. Online real quick, somebody, and then Dorothy,
You can take another one.
Okay, so Dorothy?
You touched a little bit on the violations enforcement, so I guess a little bit more information on that. I really think that we should, have some sort of, tracking for violations, 1, 2, 3 strikes, and then you lose your license. You can't comply with the neighborhood guidelines. You should lose it. There should be, some substantial fines, 250, 750, or even 1,000. And then, hey, you lose it, and then you don't get your license. But I guess he had a question also on like the septic for residential. If you have your primary home that you're renting out, are you required to provide that bumper report for years also? And then in terms of, I get it, summers are busiest season. Have you reached out to like the sewer district, water district, Safeway? I mean, the volume we have, can we even sustain that? Because there's so many folks in town, sometimes it's a dog fight when you go to Safeway. You're like, so what do? You go out of town, you go to Denver, you go to Summer, wherever. We have one grocery store. So I mean, our sources are kind of limited. So I get it, we have a lot of folks who like to visit, but we also have to be able to take care of the locals as well, not have to fight for our food. Just say, so.
great questions. I'm happy to take some, and then you might want to follow up. But first, I would say the existing code already has a complaint and violation process in it. If you are complaints are taken, referred first, the administrator of the code, so right now that's currently me, would try to resolve whatever these outstanding issues are. I will say, I don't take a lot of short-term rental complaints, first of all. Just haven't historically. But if we get a complaint in, we can verify that complaint. There's a process already built into the code where we take that to the Board of County Commissioners, to what's called a show cause hearing.
And the evidence is brought in on the record. It's a public hearing process. The property owner has the ability to respond and bring in evidence and testimony, attorneys, whomever they would like to defend their stance on it. If the board finds them in violation, they can revoke the permit and they can no longer apply for a short-term rental for 2 years. So there is enforcement already in the code. It's been there in the 10 years that I've been with the county. We haven't ever had a complaint that has had to go through that process, but we have a very stringent policy for enforcement in the code. The next, yes, if you are a property owner and you are utilizing, if you're a primary residence, yes, you're gonna still have to make sure that you're properly maintaining your septic system. Whether you're a second homeowner or a primary, you're gonna have to be able, in order to have the benefit of realizing the commercial income from your property, you're gonna have to make sure that you make sure that your septic system is properly maintained. So yes, you'll have the same regulation. And then I understand your concerns about impact. So yes, Leadville Santa and Parkville Water have certain criteria for rentals. And so they maintain their own enforcement. And then I would say that STRs are reacting to visitation. I'm not sure that they're generating all of the visitation. So, but I'm happy to defer to Rachel to maybe add some thoughts to.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of lodging capacity for this effort, because the lodging study was ongoing kind of at the same time when we started, we deferred to that to deal with some of those questions in terms of capacity and growth and opportunities. There's also just some givens in this community in terms of maximum times, like race weekends are, unless they reduce the number of people who register for the races, like there's going to be that number of people here. And so that's kind of like a separate component, but it's a reality on the ground. And so one of the pieces also is if we want to reduce over occupancy of units, then there might need to be more units available. So it's taking the same people and spreading them out. The capacity thing and the can you get eggs and milk in the grocery store is a very important piece of that. And unfortunately also not unique to Lake County, but I think most mountain communities and most residents there would commiserate with you on that. If you go and everything's empty and the line is 30 minutes to check out. That's sort of a related but separate question, but an important point as well, that the visitation has a multitude of impacts on the community. Not all of them are just housing inventory. And so making sure that we're recognizing all of those impacts on the community, because again, people come to a community. And so if everyone here isn't here because everyone's driven to Denver to go get groceries, then there's not much of the community to come to. And so just making sure that we're recognizing, even if they're not necessarily reflected in policy, but making sure that we're recognizing the broader impacts that are felt in the community. So those are really important points. Thank you.
Do we have something from online, Cece? Okay.
Hi, Carrie Vanderwhite, I'm a full-time resident. We have a second property that we purchased with the intent of building a short-term rental, but really for longer-term security for our kids, so that they might be able to afford a place to live. We would like to rent it. I'm wondering if any other communities have implemented a third category between primary and standard, where the primary residence is in the county, but not the property that the owner is looking to rent, if that makes sense.
So the primary, yeah, say that last part again, I'm so sorry.
So our primary residence is in the county. We're not looking to rent our primary residence, but
second home base.
our second property would provide housing security for us, future-proofing for our kids, and pay for the property. So just curious as to how that could be considered.
We can certainly take that as some input, but we haven't considered beyond just sustaining a primary use.
Yeah, so right now that would be, because anyone could have up to 2 licenses, so that would be a license that was just subject to a cap. So it wouldn't be cap exempt because it's not the primary residence. As far as I know, there aren't communities that have done that middle ground. It's either like primary or not. But that, you know, there would still potentially, depending on the cap and what's available, be a license available. It would just be subject to the cap under the current proposed
Do
regulation.
we have any estimate as to how long attrition would take to get a license? If there wasn't one currently available?
It's really hard to tell. I mean, it's so community dependent. So, but that's where also in having this license discussion, that option B increases the number of licenses to allow for growth. And so that's an option on the table. We're looking for feedback on is, do we want to create some growth capacity even within, we know that we'll have some space based on primary licenses. We also might lose some for people who fail their septic inspections and need a couple years to bring that into compliance. We don't know yet. But that option B does allow for that growth to create some additional licenses even under a cap. Another option was just no cap.
And the other thing that I would just highlight, I don't know, you know, what your goals are, but using that other property as a long-term rental aids in the community needs and typically has a better return on investment than short-term rental. So
Two things about that, because I know I think there's like a misconception that like anything that can't be a short-term rental will automatically go into the rental pool, but like for personal reasons, for like financial reasons, like people may choose not to do that for whatever reason. And in our case, like it's our guest room when we have a small house like most people in Leadville, you know, like when people come visit, we have to put them there. So we can't have a long-term rental there, but you know, it is a source of income like that we would like to be able to rely on.
sure, yeah, it was just an option. So, you know, if it doesn't, if that also isn't available, it's just as far as kind of return on investment, they actually cash flow a little better. So but if it need to maintain it to.
We just need the
provide-
flexibility.
Yeah, right. Kim?
Yeah, so first I have a question.
Okay.
Before my statement. And I kind of, so it said in there, homes that are, couldn't be licensed, could not get a short-term rental license if you're on a septic or on a seepage pit.
Correct.
So what about the homes that are already licensed that have seepage pits?
So they would, we will notice them, they'll have this 10 months to consider whether option. So.
They would have to upgrade their septic system or lose their short-term rental license?
Or are you saying they have a seepage pit but not a septic tank?
So
Correct.
septic systems.
Correct.
Septic systems are usually a
Do you have a
tank
tank?
and then an engineered field where the affluent gets spread out. A lot of homes in Lake County were built and they have a tank that goes into a seepage pit, which is just a hole in the ground. And so, you know, they don't often fail, but they can contaminate groundwater, well water, and there's a lot of them here. And so that was just, so they would have to upgrade their system to an actual leach field. So then my comment is, have you considered, so back to the primary residence. I understand that the city, you know, has an affidavit. I was part of that process and researching it. And I got the idea from Denver and Colorado Springs because they do not allow any second homeowner short-term rental licenses. You have to be a primary resident. And secondly, it's very, very difficult to enforce. And so if you have a cap on second homeowner short-term rental licenses, I understand there's the affidavit and there's your voter registration, but all of these things can be manipulated. So if you adopt that policy, I would highly consider how you are going to enforce that and regulate it. It's really hard to prove that someone is living in their home 230 some days out of the year. And I would also suggest maybe considering not short-term rental licensing second homeowners and putting a cap on primary short-term rentals. There has been numerous studies of the economic I still have yet to hear what the economic benefit of more short-term rentals would be for the community. And if we reduced our number of short-term rentals in our residential areas, it would maybe draw commercial lodging establishments that would pay commercial taxes, not be in our residential areas. So those are just food for thought. And I would ask that the commissioners consider, maybe, you know, like you said at the beginning, this is our opportunity to put in more regulation, and we can always come back, but it's really hard to go the other direction. Thank you.
Paul?
Yeah, thank you. So on that note, I work in an industry that I'm always traveling. I can be gone 6 months at a time. I can be gone 9 months or 9 months at a time. So having the option to come back to a house that I've owned for 23 years is really nice. I consider it my primary residency. I also have a place in Atlanta. I'm the same way, I'm back and forth. But if I have to make a decision, just like you said, I can fudge whatever I need to fudge. That's, being honest, that's just how it works. If you make that a mandatory thing, you're going to make liars out of the people who are in the room, just like when you tax people, they're going to fudge and find a way around, legally or not. So that is something that I think we should discuss. Secondly, Andrew, that what it was?
Yeah.
VRBO and Airbnb have a rating system.
Okay.
So if you get a really bad tenant or you're a really bad renter, you will have 2 stars, 1 star. So you know not to rent to those people. And it's unfortunate that we do have bad renters, but at the same time, we have bad neighbors. We have great neighbors most of the time, 99% of the time. But we have that one person in the community who's screwing everything up, which is one of the reasons why we're probably here tonight. So that is in place. I don't know if that helps or hurts.
No, it helps.
And the last question, I'm so sorry. Who is on the board? Are they elected? To make, who's making the decisions that we're all talking about right now? Okay, great. Wanted to make sure, because there's a lot of times where we get people who are just, oh yeah, it's a board, and we don't know who they are. Thank you.
I might have just a quick, I don't want to be argumentative, but I would say that regulations don't force people to lie. But that's personal choice. And if you want to do that.
I'm not saying I'm lying. I'm just saying.
And if we make regulations for the majority. We can't make regulations for, I think that I believe that good regulations speak to the majority of users. And that if we try to dial them in for every specific situation, we'll get regulations that are impossible to administer. And they're hard to public understand. And if you want to make a personal choice to decide that your property determination should be primary residence, that's your choice, and that's your right and regulation. Okay.
I mean, I was just gonna say that absent of not doing anything, there's always gonna be people who try and get it, like we have speed limits on roads. Do we all go speed limit all the time? It's still an important thing. It's important to have it. And so, yeah, some people are gonna find their way around it, but that doesn't mean that it's not an important framework to put in for the community. Like, people will always get around things, but that's not to say they're not important. You've been waiting for a while.
So a couple of recommendations, because I've been on some committees in other counties and have a lot of experience in the short-term rental world. Other counties have a requirement that the short-term rental owner provide 24-hour contact information to their neighbors in any direction around their property. Even if the county doesn't require that, I would do it. But I think that should be considered as part of the regulation, because one, the county doesn't have the staffing to deal with people that are complaining, and it sets up a good communication with your neighbors. And it may prevent situations where a neighbor is putting in one after another false allegation because they just have some kind of belief system around short-term rentals. So that's one thing. The other is that you had a question about an online contact. There is a website, if you Google it, through Lake County, where my name and other short-term rental owners' name and contact is provided.
Okay, that sounds.
I believe you guys
I don't know.
administer that.
I do apologize.
No,
I'm
it's
learning
fine.
all this.
Somebody else mentioned that short-term rentals don't provide work, and I can tell you that's totally not true. The nicest house in your neighborhood will often be the short-term rental. The minute something becomes at all a chip paint on the door, you have a contractor out there. That we have cleaners and house managers and property managers and our cleaners we become very close to and rely on heavily. And take care of and pay well beyond the living wage, between $30 and $40 an hour, which makes a huge difference in this community. In this case, it's a teacher staying home with her child, and she can bring her child to clean our home. And we take care of her and she takes care of us. The last thing I wanted to say is that my first home was an affordable home. So I would love for there to be earmarks for something that I can do as a short-term rental owner to help affordable housing. I think it's incredibly important. I'm so disappointed that municipalities are targeting short-term rentals and along with the hotel lobby, allowing for this guerrilla warfare to occur where short-term rentals are, despite incredible evidence to the contrary, are being targeted as the #1 problem for home prices, for increased rent. None of that is true. You look in places where they've outlawed short-term rentals and the prices keep going up. It had no effect. Furthermore, in that regard, institutional investors outnumber mom and pop short-term rental owners by a factor of 14 times. So if the county and the state wants to do something for affordable housing, make it illegal for institutional investors like Blackstone, Fidelity, and Vanguard to invest in residential homes that are sitting empty and not serving any purpose. They're not helping the local economy. And that's where our focus needs to be. All the rest of it is a smokescreen, and you are all being used by these corporate entities who are really the problem more often than not. We contribute to the community. We tell people where to go eat out every night of the week. And we give coupons to Tenderfoot Farms. We are not here to hurt people. And without us, you don't need workforce housing. You get rid of more than 1/3 of the short-term rentals and 1/3 of the people lose their job.
Yeah. All right, back on the topic of septic. Everybody's favorite, right? I'm here on behalf of Mount Albert Water, which is in Panarch. And our interest, right, is protection of the water supply down there. On the 3-year pumping cycle, was there consideration for 2 years or consideration for 4 years? How does that, what's the spectrum of regularity of, and where does 3 years fit in that? Just out of curiosity. Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So I would love for every system to be inspected every year. That would be amazing. That would ensure we have great systems in great condition for everyone. It'd be very expensive, but it's not realistic. We have right now 2, maybe 3 licensed inspectors in the county that can pump and inspect. We have some folks that can inspect but can't pump because they don't have a pumper truck. So the available inspectors are the limiting factor. And so when we were looking at this, I was thinking like these guys are already working full-time every week, 7 days a week right now, just to keep up with the demand of the transfer of title program. And if we were then to require more than a 3-year period, these guys would not be able to keep up with the demand. It would not be able to service all the short-term rentals, and it'll all fall apart. So in an effort to make sure that our transfer title program is functioning and people can sell and buy homes in the county, and we can ensure that septic systems are in good quality to be used as short-term rentals, that was kind of the time period that we were thinking. Granted, we could always move in either direction as we have more information. You know, a big part of this is collecting more data. So we're gonna institute some of these policies and we're gonna run into some hard things along the way and we'll need to adjust. You know, so this is what we were thinking out right now. Up until 2025, we're gonna do that 5-year period to let people catch up. And then afterward, go to that 3-year inspection period. And then as we get more data, we can adjust to what makes the most sense.
And it sounds like there's a business opportunity, right? If anybody wants to open up.
Oh my gosh. People want to start a business pumping septics and inspecting septics.
And hire people.
Please do. Thank you.
Misty.
Okay, I'm pretty simple, then. So my name's Misty Kierton. Me and my husband own Tenderfoot Farm, which is a little grocery store in Twin Lakes, which is going to advance to Leadville. We've already signed a lease. So we also have a little business that we do. It's called Destination Twin Lakes. And we are the person that, the close by person that registers for people. So I like the little questions. You said no fires. Perfect. What about propane grills if they offer a grill? And then they're gonna ask me, can we have a propane fire? So where would we go with that?
That's a good question.
Before you answer that, could I add on to that? So a few years back, I live out in Gem Valley and I was in my backyard. Not dressed very appropriately because it's like nobody sees me. And I, no, I wasn't. You know me better than that. Sorry, would never do that. Well, no. Anyway, all of a sudden I turn around and there's Ken Olson, one of our old county commissioners. And he's out with a tape measure, measuring my fire pit, because we generally have a fire in my backyard in the summers. It's just kind of what we do. We have parties. And I said, Ken, what are you doing in my backyard? And he said, well, Roxy, we've been told time and again that your fire pit is perfect, it's safe, and we're developing an ordinance to write for appropriate fire pits in the county. And so there is an ordinance that allows fire pits in homes. How are you gonna differentiate? And then answer Misty's question.
Sure. So I think that first easy question, I think that propane grills and other, we need to explore that a little bit more, Misty.
Correct.
But I think immediately, even if you have a regulation size fire pit, if it is an open fire, because we have fire bans all the time and we want to protect it. And it, you know, with our wildfire protection planning, it is meeting the goal of our community. And you just can't ensure that your renter is gonna, you know, I would imagine most property owners don't want an insured to be outside starting fires. Now I would defer to talking to Leadville Lake County Fire Rescue on the propane grills and just see, because I know on fire bans, there's different levels of use.
Well, I just know some of the houses out there, they leave a grill for their gas to use, and I just didn't know if that was something we should probably start pushing out, maybe not do that. But what about the homeowner then? If the homeowner's there for 3 weeks and they want a fire, they can, that's different. It's just for the guests that are renting your place. Okay.
And a charcoal grill or a gas grill is an open fire or an enclosed fire?
I think I would have to defer to the fire department to
Just
help me.
define it.
Yeah, to define that. Certainly no open fires, no fire pits, those kind of things.
We'll try to
But I
push those
just
away
would,
a little
but
bit.
we do need to fine tune that just a little bit so that we make sure that in the regulation, I'd like to just follow the recommendation of the fire department and the
It's pretty
wildfire
clear when there is a
mitigation.
ban too.
Yes.
Isn't it pretty clear when there is?
There's a very clear ban, but we just want to kind of take those, the risk out of rental. So, property owners just have to fire whatever, follow whatever the county regs are.
And the ban.
Yes.
There's a ban.
Exactly.
Hey, Anne.
Oh, I'm right there.
I can't help myself. I just have to take 30 seconds to plug and say that there are so many avenues that anybody with any approach or platform that they hope to speak to, there are multiple platforms to integrate that into conversation within the community. There's that, I know that it's been mentioned, there's the housing authority, Lake County Golden Generation facilitates the Housing Coalition, which also has multiple platforms of communication. And I hear that there are a lot of people who are in and out of the county often, and it does consume a lot of time sometimes. All of the VOCC meetings are recorded. The public meetings are recorded, and there are the Housing Coalition goes in the newspaper once a month. There is multiple ways to engage in the housing conversation so that perhaps it doesn't feel like a surprise, or maybe feel like one specific area is being targeted when there are coalitions, robust coalitions that have had in-depth conversation about like which strategies that the community is looking to take to improve the housing market or the housing economy, I guess, in Lake County. And I promise you that if you wanted to talk about it, Chrissy, she is an expert. I have personally been able to have conversations with VOCC members out of like his questions and concerns. And Jeff is exceptionally friendly on the part together. It's great. And like, I can say in my experience, I don't know how many homeowners who rely on income from short-term rentals are in that conversation. And so just know that some voices are missing from different areas in our community, and that there are multiple platforms to integrate your voices. And I think ultimately that can create like a stronger community for us in the long run. And so instead of having more conversations like this in the future, we're doing a lot of foundational work on the back end by participating in these housing conversations, so that like we don't have to come to a place where we are capping potential income opportunities for the next round. I had this one. I'm also willing to talk about how this for hours.
And just to add on to Claire's statement, you can subscribe to the county website, choose your areas of interest, and you will automatically be updated every single time we put something on there. You may get more than what you wanted, but you can, so if you are looking to be involved, the county website is a great tool to subscribe to. You can choose what areas you want to be notified on, and every time we put something on our website, you will know about it. Every time an agenda goes out, every time being posted, you will know. So that, you know, there definitely is an opportunity there. Christy?
Yeah, I figured I'd just go since Claire gave me such a good warm up. If you are interested in learning more about the housing work that's going on in Lake County, please visit housinglake.org, housinglake.org. You can join. You can get my contact information on there. You can read all the reports that go back all the way to 2018. We put updates on like what the future affordable housing developments are going to look like. The links to attend the housing authority meetings and all of that. I just wanted to say also that I commend the Board of County Commissioners and CTV and EPS for all this hard work. I can tell that you guys were really thoughtful and worked hard on it. And I just have one question. We learned when the city rolled out their policy that it was a lot more work than they anticipated, and they used mini reps right off that. So my question is for Mr. Bueller. Do you plan on committing more staffing funding to this department to deal with the excess work that is going to come from rolling out these regulations? Like CC is fantastic, David's fantastic, Anna's fantastic, and they're gonna need more help. So, gonna do that.
I feel like I know what the right answer is. Yeah, and I think, I mean, to like dodge the question in a typical politician way, and I also think we're trying to make it administratively feasible, you know, and as low administrative burden, you know, as we can at the time too. You know, because I mean, I think there are other counties we discovered or jurisdictions, you can create something that's really hard to implement. So we're going to try to learn from that too. But yeah, and also, I mean, we have been increasing the staff of CPD. So yeah, I mean, we'll make sure the system works.
And I would just mention, and you may have something too, Rachel. I would just mention, thank you, Christy. I'll give you that $5. I mean. So thank you so much for that. I would say there's just a little bit of a difference, just that the city was starting at square one. We've been administering short-term rental permits, since 2000 and I'm gonna be wrong, I think 2012 or 13, or no, before then, because I've been with the county that long, 2007, I think, or something, anyway, 2009. So we, at least we've already, so we're modifying our regulations, but Chrissy's absolutely right, and CPD is always looking for a few good people, so we'll be posting. We already have a position that's being advertised right now.
And it created a job.
Yeah, so come on down, we'll put you to work. So
I'll
thank
just
you.
add, one of the driving factors in crafting these was administrative feasibility. Worse than no regulations, is regulations that aren't or can't be enforced. And so that was part of this, was crafting something that could be reasonably enforced. And then part of also increasing or adjusting the license fee as a cost recovery mechanism. If an additional staff member is needed to make this program functional, the cost of that staff member can be recovered through the administrative fee. That's how like those types of fees work legally. And so that is a way to increase the resources to the department to do it without, like, it's a net neutral or net zero cost essentially.
And we just went through a cost recovery study. We
Yeah.
just amended our fees as of today. So, we've taken that as play, but again, I totally appreciate like your CP.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, you are.
So has any jurisdiction, or we thought about in this design about setting the standard license cap on the basis of the occupancy number, not the unit number? It seems like if one of the goals is to address the impact on housing inventory available for full-time residents, you care more about the number of bedrooms or occupancy levels you're taking out of the inventory rather than the number of units. So makes things more complicated, but just a thought that occurred to me. And then a second question, I'm still intrigued by the idea of auctioning the licenses.
Yeah.
Like, this is a government created valuable asset that people are monetizing. And giving it away for free seems not necessarily the right number, right?
Not be out of the property.
Yeah, you're looking at that backwards. No, because there are properties that do have a license and properties that don't have a license. The license is created by the policy and regulation. And it has value, it's not created.
The they're at the spot is the people who are able.
Yes. Yeah.
Affordable, you're trying to afford to live in your full-time house, like me.
Well, for.
It becomes a class warfare if you auction it off.
You throw your
And the
septic
corporations get all the houses.
you throw your septic inspection in there, then you throw that in there, it's two. Well, where's the affordability for someone that's trying to contain a house versus an apartment?
Somebody who wants to have their
I
house.
think there's plenty
would
of
be the
platforms
goals.
to join the housing conversation. If you would like them.
Rachel, I'll
Um,
take that. I'm gonna.
On the bedrooms versus units, again, there's lots of different ways to think about the utilization and caps. When we think about ease of administration, getting into bedrooms versus units gets a little tricky. Also, like some communities have done like percentage of housing stock versus an absolute number. It's just different ways to approach it and really community dependent. In terms of maintaining local housing inventory, we feel that the community housing overlays achieve that goal. And so looking at the county as kind of two zones or overlays, because zones have different meanings when we're talking about land use. but really maintaining those areas that have been identified as prime local housing opportunities and limiting short-term rental uses more there. And then in other areas, just looking at units, because at the end of the day, most people are renting the units themselves. And so it's just a more functional mechanism of measuring short-term rentals. I know we've already had a little bit of the conversation about the auctioning piece, so I don't know how much we want to get into it here. There's some, there are lots of different considerations, not the least of which is the legal ones, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to try to speak to those, but I know enough to be dangerous, not enough to be useful, which is always a bad place to be. But again, we're, like I said at the beginning, you know, especially in Colorado, short-term rentals have always happened. They just used to happen differently. And then Airbnb and Vrbo just kind of democratized them in a way, and like anyone could have access instead of people who just contracted with the local property management companies. And so it's changed the nature of the game. And so we're still, you know, everywhere we're learning as we go. And so there's lots of different creative ways to address the issues. But at the end of the day, back to those key driving factors of this is we're looking to maintain the economic value and the support of the economy while also mitigating some of the negative impacts. And that's the overall goal of this approach. And so we think the sort of, I think it was 5 areas of regulations achieve that. But we know that regulations can change. And so we put a new structure and framework in place, and then we learn, and there can be adjustments made in the future.
Right, right, and to think back on that, exactly your idea, Jeff, on thinking about an auction, I would say that we would need we need more time. We would need more time to consider that. So I would say what we're proposing is, you know, we could always continue, if the board decided to put some, you know, you want CPD to expend some, resources into looking at that, we could, but we wouldn't be able to come to a finished product in time to meet our desired outcome. So long term, could we, you know, if you want to set us on the road of looking into that, we totally could. We just wouldn't have anything achievable according to our timeline. So.
I just want to keep a point, but I know we're over time, but, there's a current lawsuit against the town of Breckenridge from property owners. So are we following that, and are we taking any learnings from that in terms of like potential litigation risk for the county or owner to owner?
Absolutely. And I know Rachel wanted to speak to it as well, but absolutely. I will say that already everything that we've talked about tonight has been through our land use council. And so we are not, we're not looking to bring about something that's going to be a case study. We're staying more in a safer area. That being said, there's always things to learn. And then Rachel, if you want to.
Yeah, I'll just add it's Breckenridge and Summit County and Telluride currently are under active litigation, all for slightly different reasons. It's new. 2, generally people don't like being challenged for what they can do. And so there's always the chance that there will be a challenge. Like Anne said, we feel like what's being proposed is well within the bounds of what is legal for the county to regulate, based on sort of enabling legislation for counties in terms of what they can do, which is more limited than it is for like there's home rule and statutory, and what they can do is different. And so we've discussed what statutory communities can do. It's not to say there won't be litigation. We can never say, I wish I could tell the future. I'm still working on it. Haven't been able to do it yet. But we're following it, especially, you know, professionally for our firm who's doing this work in a lot of places. coincidentally, those are all places we've worked in. The subject of the litigation is not things that we've worked on. Pure coincidence, I promise. But it is because it's new. And so we're still working out those case studies, and sometimes it takes litigation to set the framework, because we look to similar situations to understand where the bounds are. And then someone has to say, well, is it? And then the court says yes. And so sometimes it's just it's new territory in a lot of places. So, but to answer the first question, yes, we're tracking it. Peter?
Just listening to all of this, and I guess expanding on what Jeff was talking about, you know, it seems to me that if you're gonna increase, you know, above the, you know, the current cap, that the county's working real hard to increase affordable housing and spending lots of taxpayer dollars to, you know, to move that forward. You don't want to have that, you know, those actions be counterproductive by, you know, by taking housing out of the market for short-term rentals. So maybe there's a way to, you know, as you increase your affordable housing inventory, like if you build, you know, 20 units, that maybe you could, you know, you could add another short-term rental to the, you know, to the cap inventory. So in other words, you kind of don't want to be chasing your tail, that you have to keep increasing affordable housing opportunities because you've also been increasing short-term rentals. That's counterproductive and not a good use of taxpayer money. Does that make any sense? You know, somehow tie the, you know, the increases in short-term rentals to meeting, you know, meeting goals of in affordable housing at the same time.
Sure, and I think that would be a great goal. I will say that, you know, in new development, there's a lot of consideration given to that kind of matrix, maybe in a less direct way. You know, new communities or new construction that's coming on. There's a lot of discussion about the inclusion of community housing within there. There's always a discussion whether or not, like in the PUD, the short-term rentals are even going to be allowed in that community. So there's a lot of other ways to consider, you know, like future housing stock so I think there's a lot of different variables that can be tools that we use in future planning. But with the so I would agree, but I think that speaks more to kind of like some good future planning and as we're looking at new housing stocks that comes on. We've already incentivized our planned unit development code to require participation and affordability and housing. And so in the creation of new housing, absolutely, there's going to be a lot of discussion about the presence of community housing needs within that new housing stock, as well as there'll be a discussion about, you know, the regulations may drive whether or not short-term rentals can be part of that housing stock or not. So yeah, a lot of the future look at development will absolutely include those overarching community goals.
So I guess just to follow up on that, so I guess to get to your original questions, I'd support, you know, option A of having a cap and, you know, and then condition, you know, additional, you know, consideration in the future for increasing the number from 127 to 170 or whatever those numbers are. You know, to have that be conditioned, as I suggested, on meeting the short-term, the affordable housing goals. So that those two things aren't working. You're not taking another, you know, 40 units out of the housing market, and then saying, well, then we're gonna have to, you know, build another 40 units of affordable housing to make up for that, because that's a, you know, that's a subsidy. The taxpayers are then subsidizing the new short-term rental.
So we're trying to address kind of that whole idea with the community housing overlay. So we're trying to already identify areas in communities that meet that attainability. And then certainly looking at the impact of new housing development coming forward. So I would say our regulation is doing, our proposal is to, you know, really carve out where in the community we shouldn't already increase the degree of use. And in those areas that would be more attainable and meet our community needs. So but certainly future planning should consider the impact of making sure that we're creating more units that go into our community housing needs. Absolutely. Yes, Sophie.
So how are you gonna come to deciding on option A, B, or C? Are you gonna put this out to your residents of Leadville to give their input, say, I'd like to see option A or B?
So we'll have it on our website. You can go on, everyone, it'll ultimately be the Board of Commissioners' decision to make.
But would community input also be also the driving factor in?
Always
They're
is.
in that direction.
Yeah,
So I
always
think-
is.
So I just want to
Sure.
make sure. That.
Yeah, absolutely. We're asking for feedback on option A, B, and C. The Board of County Commissioners will eventually make that decision on where they want to. So we will be the vehicle to get that information to them. So we'll have it on the website. You can go on, you can vote, you can provide your feedback, and we'll take that to the board. So it will be part of the public input.
Comment.
Do you want to remind us of the hearing dates?
Sure. I'm gonna go back to there, the work session is January 16th. The public hearing is February 26th. And final decision by the board will be February 28th.
I have a question, and
Yes, I'm sorry.
no, you're totally good. I hope it's relevant. I'm just curious to get your guys' thoughts, because obviously there's a lot wider, bigger Colorado situations with tax and short-term rentals like corporations at that like 30% number. Obviously, the math doesn't math, if that might not make sense for a lot of people.
Crazy.
Right. So curious if the county has any control or like autonomy over abiding by those larger taxations, and if you guys have any thoughts or like knowledge in that area.
So you're referring to the pending legislation on, if you're renting more than 90 days.
Yes.
In a calendar year, that you would be taxed as a commercial entity.
Yes.
At 4 times the current tax rate.
At a commercial tax rate.
Yeah, at a
And be
commercial.
assessed as a residential home rather than assessed as a corporate business based on your income as a business. So it's not.
So there's a bill being introduced to the Ramsden Marine Brigade that for everybody that doesn't know, that if you are renting your home more than 90 days in a calendar year, that you would come under the commercial tax rate. And so.
Okay, so in general, so for folks who just aren't aware, so residential and commercial property are taxed at different rates right now. And so you take the assessed value and it's either, this year it's a little bit different, but typically for residential, it's 7.15% of the assessed value is what you get taxed on. For commercial, it's like 28%. And so that's the differential. And so there have been thoughts to, because some people see short-term rentals as commercial entities operating in residential property, to tax them as such at the commercial rate, which would increase the tax on those properties. That is a state mechanism. It's a state decision. There's no local authority over that. So there was a bill introduced a couple years ago. It failed in committee. There's another one planning to be introduced this session. The session starts tomorrow if anyone's interested. There's lots of fun legislation coming through. So pay attention to the news. But again, so that's up to state legislators. So any feedback you have on that goes to your state representative. And that's a statewide decision. There is not local authority over that.
So at the hearing for that to move out into the legislative session, there was 3.5 hours of testimony against it. They moved it forward by a vote of 3 to 4. And the only people that voted for it were the county governments for Breckenridge, Summit County, and a few other ski counties. So you as a county have a say. If your local economy is affected by what will be ultimately 80% or more of the short-term rentals shutting down almost immediately, flooding the housing market, dropping prices temporarily. If the county believes the county can have a role in the state's decision. Right now, the only people in 3.5 hours of testimony who testified for that, very unfair, was the counties that are currently being sued for overstepping their bounds.
Well, I would just say a
That's your
couple
opinion. I think
things.
there's a lot of people in this room
I-
that disagree with that.
I
So
would-
just want to put that
Well,
out there. You're acting like it's fact and it's a story.
Well,
I'm just
no,
gonna
I-
say a
that's
couple
fine.
things.
There's only-
One
All
county,
that's done based
let
on
me-
this guy says there's no data to show.
I'm
the
just-
evidence.
I'm gonna say a couple of things. As an economist, we do not know what the impact would be. We don't know. We can make conjectures, we can make estimates based on other things that have happened in similar circumstances. We don't know what the outcome would be. One county is currently under litigation, 2 municipalities, and I'm gonna apologize because I don't know who your state representative is, but every one of you has a phone number and an email to them, and that is your way of having your voice heard. And I encourage you to do it if you have an opinion on that, because it is currently happening. There are impacts that come of it, like state legislation impacts local communities. We know that. And decisions are made by decision makers and they make it based on what they hear. And so it would be a major change. Whether or not it gets passed through to be seen, it would change the landscape of short-term renting, for better or for worse. I don't know. And this is my profession. I cannot tell you. But it is something that's currently happening. There's no local control for it.
Yeah.
I just say for the record, Lake County government is part of the coalition supporting that bill.
Perfect.
Andrew?
Thank you for you and your team tonight. And the second thing is with the pumping, can we have outside counties come in or what's?
If they're registered, they
If
have to
they're
be
registered.
registered in Lake County.
So,
And that
if we-
list is on the website.
okay, so if they get behind here, we can contact if they're on the list.
Yeah, and anybody will, I mean, if you know somebody that has a company, that's a pumping company, they can come, they can take a test, they can register with Lake County, they can nominal fee, and they can be
Okay.
one of our registered contractors. We're always looking for, so if you know somebody from Mount Airy that's interested in doing work in Lake County, I think David had already, when he was here, he already mentioned, like, we're always looking for good. There's a need.
Thank
in
you.
Lake County, so.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah, I have two questions, one for each of you.
Okay.
So depending upon whichever plan you choose, or ultimately what's chosen, would there be like a limit to that? So it would be like, we're gonna do plan A for a year and then sit down and assess? Or would there be a plan to reassess, even if it didn't have like, say, term limit? That's question one. Do you want me to go on to question two?
I can do one first. So that's a great point, and I would say that our land development code is a living code. And we are really commissioned as the keepers of the code for the board to be evaluating that. So exactly, like if we adapt something, we'll be tracking it and monitoring it. If we see our code is not working the way that we wanted it to, then it's time to go to the board and say, hey, we need to adjust this. So we are constantly always kind of monitoring our code, but particularly like backcountry zoning. We were reporting initially monthly to the board to make sure that they knew exactly what kind of impact that was going to have. Same kind of thing with this. So that is really part of our responsibilities as the stewards of the code and making sure. So we'll definitely be kind of watching this, and especially as we adapt new rules and new code, we really monitor that to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences or something we didn't think of. And hey, this really isn't working, or we need to adjust somehow. So absolutely that's really our responsibility and role for the board in our department. So great question.
My second one was for you. I think you mentioned earlier on something that I'm probably gonna turn on, but it was like be a good neighbor, serve language. I was wondering if you would consider, or whomever would consider another meeting, because we all have meetings, where we as citizens might be able to come to offer some input as to what we might like to see on that. So a little bit of background about myself. I managed short-term rentals for about 12 years. I am not doing that anymore. But during that time period, I developed a lot of really good language, and I did do what you said. I went to every neighbor and gave them my card, and because it's the ones in the city especially, but also the ones where people are traipsing through your neighborhood, things like that, and just specifically address yours concern about Safeway. During COVID, you came up with language that basically said, shop on your way up and bring your food from Denver, because we're not gonna have your toilet paper, in a nice way. But my question would be, would you consider allowing us to maybe share some of that with you, or share, like the gentleman who said people were going through his neighbor or through his yard? Maybe he could say, this is my concern. And we try to develop something together as a community that makes people feel that they're involved in bringing that forward. Is that something you would think of?
I think it's fantastic. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Just a bit more information on that. So there is a guide being developed at the state level as a partnership with multiple tourism departments. And so it's actually the Leadville, Lake County, I'm gonna get the name wrong, but Adam, who does tourism stuff, is involved in that. And so it would come from there and then be localized. And so I think there's definitely an opportunity to have that input and say, like, one, we found this wording works as opposed to that wording, or hey, like, here people really need to know also about A, B, and C. So 100%.
You're saying on the state level?
So there's one being developed at the state level that communities can use.
Okay.
And Lake County is a part of that development. And then it would be like localized to the community. And so definitely it's being done through the tourism department. So that would be sort of the avenue for that feedback, but definitely I can't speak for other people. I think that feedback would be really, really important as part of that process.
So just to clarify, you're saying I should call the tourism department?
I'm saying like, that would be, I think, like, coordinated.
I can definitely reach out to Adam and say that you've got some great
And I just love to strategies, because I think that we're different than what we are on the state level.
Right. Oh,
Our
for sure.
community
Yeah.
is So.
Yeah.
Like we could look at the states, but then we want to adapt it.
Right, so, yeah, so one is already being created locally, but again, I think that like on the ground input would be really important to just making sure that it's kind of right sized and everything.
I think that's a great idea, Melissa, and I'm happy to help facilitate that discussion with Adam. And thank you for something. I know you're not doing this.
No, but I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That'd be great.
Just before I leave, I want to verbalize my feedback after hearing, and there were the 3 options, and I would say that to support like local people, working class, serving and service industry people, we can rent our rooms to long-term renters, we can do that with our ADUs, there's lots of different ways to use that option A. If I'm a primary renter or primary, there's no cap. So I feel like for those of us that are looking to make a little bit of extra money, like that is available to us. And that also supports like having more residential properties for residents, versus option B and C go more in the other direction. So just a second, what some other people are saying, like to support residents staying in residential houses and letting us then like rent a room. Option A, I feel like hits that. So I want to give that feedback as a community member.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. All right. Awesome. Is there anything else before we, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
You made it worth our time. Thank you.
I'm glad. You all made it worth the drive.
Thank you, Rachel, for making that.
Yeah,
positive
should be
drive.
fine.
Thank you.